Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Management Studies, SOMS, Certificate Programs, Certificate in NGO Management, CNM, BMS, 001 Introduction to NGO Management, Block-1 Concepts Functions of NGOs, Unit-3 Issues in NGO Management, 3.1 Introduction. This unit will introduce you to various issues that need to be considered in the management of NGOs. As we have seen earlier, the NGO is different to a normal profit-making company where one it needs to be concerned about is the production process and handling machines for profits to be made. It is not as simple as this, as there are a number of issues a commercial company must face. But the NGO faces some complex issues from the socio-economic and political environment outside as well as issues from within its own setup. Service is the hallmark of a NGO's performance, and therefore it is normally where such service is needed that NGOs will work. The poor are normally the communities NGOs usually serve. The challenges that poverty present are daunting. Along with poverty are other factors that need to be understood in order to tackle the situation successfully. There are a number of issues and helpful studies that have been undertaken, and we will consider some of these in this unit. 3.2 Understanding the context: social, legal, financial, environmental, and other issues are growing increasingly complex and offer a challenge to NGOs to manage their organizations while keeping their mission in focus. They frequently face issues that not only require practical management expertise, but also a knowledge and sensitivity to their contexts. You will hear such terms as socioeconomic or even socio-political factors and even environmental factors. Our people live in such complex contexts, and it is important for an NGO to consider them. NGOs engaged in community development do not merely deal with people in the community. There are numerous related factors. Local community dynamics must be studied. Legal and local governmental aspects should be followed. Environmental and socio-cultural issues must be taken into consideration, and now in recent years there is a growing emphasis on human rights and gender issues. NGO leaders and teams will need to have the knowledge and skills necessary to work amid people encountering such varied forces in the field. The NGO manager must be able to understand these complex intertwining issues and frequently handle out of the ordinary decisions. There is a crying need for various aspects of management knowledge and skills to handle the NGO environment while making decisions. You will be introduced to some of the issues. The issues we will be discussing in this unit are I. Poverty and development, 2. Aid and development, 3. Dependency and sustainability, 6. Development indicators, 3.38 to development. Most of what we know as social service in the early days was aid to help people in need. There were feeding programs, grants of money for people in need, and other such charitable acts. In fact, these groups were some of the first NGOs. We cannot wholly dismiss such agencies, as there are times when there is need and the only way to help is to give money or material to bring relief. But development is much more. Gradually we saw the emergence of relief and welfare organizations. These became active during calamities and catastrophes, and many people gave small and large donations to help. For instance, when Bangladesh had its first major cyclone in 1974, many international organizations rushed in to help. Volunteers brought food, clothing, money, and other materials to help the suffering. While this was good and much needed, it bred many ills that were hard to handle. For instance, Soon there was corruption, with some middlemen becoming rich and the poor not receiving what was rightfully meant for them. Clothing, milk powder, blankets, etc. were sold in the open market. However, you will find that many of these organizations have moved much further today and involved in what is referred to as development. World Vision started by just helping Korean orphans, but today has grown to handling major development projects. They moved from merely relief to handling development. But what is the difference? As the words imply, relief is temporary effort through immediate interventions, compassionate and welfare activities and provision of materials and services, but development is an ongoing process. Let us try to understand this shift to development. We normally use the word development when we speak of improvement, growth, progress, advance, etc. We speak of a child developing in the sense of increasing his/her stature, capacity or performance. Similar, when we are engaged in social action, we would like to see development in terms of progress or improvement or advancement towards some independence in their striving for improvement towards reasonably acceptable standards of living economically and socially. In this sense, the aim of development is to help people become mature, more self-reliant, developing their capacities to handle their conditions and to become productive. Ultimately, the aim is to improve the quality of life for individuals, families, communities, and countries as a whole. The indication of true development is when improvement is seen in people responsible for their own food, housing, health, education, employment, and above all assured of their security. NGOs face an enormous task in bringing about development and therefore setting the process going. There are various measures being employed today through training of individuals and communities for self-help initiatives, small-scale, self-reliant development projects, cooperatives, employment opportunities within their own contexts. Although economic development appears to be the goal of everybody, it is the change in attitudes that is most required. Therefore, when NGOs speak about development, it is more than just economic development. It is a transformation of social, economic, environmental, and cultural conditions through changed attitudes. Therefore, when we speak of developing a community, it is the process or effort of building people groups on a local level to transform their capacities to handle their social relationships, their basic economy, improve their surroundings, and in fact overall strive for a better quality of life. Read the following mission statement of Action Aid International, an international development agency which works with the poor and marginalized people of India. Our vision is a world without poverty and injustice, one in which every woman, man and girl and boy enjoy the right to life with dignity. We partner local organizations who have the knowledge and experience and enjoy the confidence of the poor and marginalized communities we work with. Our mission is to work with poor and excluded women, men and girls and boys to eradicate poverty, discrimination and injustice. The people we work with include the Dalit and tribal people, other sections of the rural and urban poor, women, children, and minorities. Within these groups, our focus is on people in vulnerable situations such as people living with chronic hunger, ill health, migrant and bonded workers, children out of education, urban homeless people, trafficked persons, persons with disability, displaced people and refugees, and people affected by natural and human-made disasters. Our partners range from small community support groups to national alliances and international networks seeking food rights, education for all, trade justice, just and democratic governance, and action against HIV/AIDS. Our work with these national and international campaign networks highlights the issues that affect poor people and influences the way governments and international institutions think. 3.4 Poverty and Development. Most of us will look at poverty in terms of money, property, perhaps education, etc., and that may be what you have put into your definition. Now you are ready to see some other vital aspects in the understanding of poverty. In the 1960s, the main focus in discussions on poverty was on the level of incomes of individuals and families, and hence it was measured in monetary terms. Even today, the World Bank will often speak about the poverty in terms of incomes of dollars per day, but is poverty simply about the level of income obtained by households or individuals? Being convinced that it is not, practitioners look at poverty more holistically, although poverty may basically be tied to monetary matters. The one thing that happens is that because of the lack of money, the poor do not have access to many things that the richer are able to get. Poverty is therefore lack of access, for example, to social services that others enjoy. Because of lack of money, the poor are exploited. Many times they meekly surrender to the whims of the rich bosses. Poverty is about being powerless, therefore, you can see how much more poverty is than merely lacking money. It is now understood the inability to participate in society because of economic, social, cultural or political factors. Let us briefly consider how the understanding of poverty has evolved over the decades, coming on relative deprivation, and this helped redefine poverty, not just as a failure to meet minimum nutrition or subsistence levels, but rather as a failure to keep up with the accepted standards in a society. There are large disparities in these levels. The shift broadened the concept of income poverty to a wider set of basic needs, including those lack of access to health, education, and other services. New perspectives were added in the 1980s. The main changes were a. The incorporation of non-monetary aspects, b. Vulnerability of the poor to seasonal hazards, cyclone, drought, heavy rains, c. A broadening of the concept to speak of livelihood. Soon the term used was sustainable livelihood, d. Theoretical work by Amartya Sen, who had earlier contributed the notion of food entitlement or access, emphasized that income was only valuable insofar as it increased the capabilities of individuals and thereby permitted functionings. Finally, in the 1980s there was a rapid increase in the study of gender. Policies followed to empower women to be agents of development. The following terms are used to describe poverty: income or consumption poverty, human under-development, social exclusion, 111 being lack 08 capability and functioning, vulnerability, livelihood unsustainability, lack of basic needs, relative deprivation, 3.5 poverty and exploitation. Mahatma Gandhi said, as we are often reminded, there's enough on this planet FOC, everyone's needs, but not for everyone's greed. Greed leads to exploit at 1011, and this is where the poor are further victimized. With recent consumerist TRCNDS, human greed increases, and this widens the gap between the rich and the poor in some nations and is bringing about an imbalance on a larger scale between nations in the world. Issues of justice are coming into consideration. Till recently, it was called on to speak of the necessity for economic development among backward nations. India was a poor country. The assumption tilde blind tl tilde is lang tilde tilde age was that Western-style industrialization was the model of progress, all tilde, oi tilde, I tilde, I tilde, naji tilde cent, practices. While TLI discussions can be elaborated upon in relation to the rich West, often referred to as the North, and the poorer countries we see such exploitation and I tilde justice right here in India. The gap between the rich and the poor in some parts of the country are glaring. The poor are suppressed and nagged to remain poor so that the rich can enjoy. Social injustice is an important study for the NGO community. It is a concept relating to the perceived unfairness or injustice of a society in its divisions of rich and the poor. The manifestations are in issues of wages and labor, fair price, gender distinctions, etc. NGOs are taking up such issues in a big way and fighting for justice towards the poor, the TR1BILS, women and children, etc. NGOs can intervene in various ways. 011 of the best tools to provide is education. As access to education is limited and anything they receive is substandard, non-formal education could be introduced. These should be flexible programs as the dropout rate are among Dalits and especially girls is very high. Such programs should illiterate in health and hygiene, basic crafts, better lifestyle and values, responsible citizenship including rights and responsibilities, etc. There are various existing Dalit groups through which such programs could be introduced. The government has planned a number of welfare schemes for the development of the Dalit communities and NGOs could tap funds from here. There is a wide open door for service. 3.6 Poverty and vulnerability. The poor, because of their poverty, are extremely vulnerable and therefore get ensnared into commercial exploitation. You will read two case studies below. One on human trafficking and the other on organ transplant racket. Note how the poor are trapped and, many times for paltry sums of money, millions of people are enslaved through forced labor and commercial sexual exploitation, from which they cannot free themselves. Such slavery is referred to as human trafficking. On countries, most instances of forced labor are linked with unscrupulous employers taking advantage of loose laws to exploit vulnerable workers. These workers are made more vulnerable. 1. To forced labor practices because of unemployment, poverty, crime, discrimination, corruption, political conflict, and cultural acceptance of the practice. Immigrants are particularly targets. The U.S. State Debt Trafficking in Persons report stated that the United Arab Emirates, UAE, is a destination country for men, women and children trafficked primarily from South and East Asia and the former Soviet Union for the purposes of sexual and labor. Although prostitution and drug-related crimes are areas where such practices prevail, domestic workers may be trapped in slavery through the use of force or coercion, such as physical, including sexual or emotional abuse. Children are particularly vulnerable to domestic abuse, which occurs in private homes and is often unregulated by public authorities. For example, there is great demand in some wealthier countries of Asia and the Persian Gulf for domestic servants who sometimes fall victim to conditions of involuntary servitude. Indian, Indonesian and Filipino workers are in plenty. Child labor is another area. Most international organizations and national laws indicate that children may legally engage in light work. But even this allowance of light work is exploited, with the worst forms of child labor prevailing all over the world. The sale and trafficking of children and their exploitation in bonded and forced labor are particularly being exposed. Read the following news item which interlinks HIV and AIDS to human trafficking. AWDP news item 5th January 2008. The study, which was launched here today, has found that a large number of those at the risk of being trafficked in South Asia are young girls and women, and they also run the risk of getting infected with HIV. The highest reported incidence of This double burden is in Nepal, Bangladesh and India, the study said. Factors such as gender inequality, violence and lack of economic opportunities for women increase their risk to both trafficking and HIV. Younger girls are at higher risk of trafficking as well as HIV according to recent studies by Harvard School of Public Health. In Mumbai, 1/4 of the trafficked individuals tested positive for HIV while in Nepal, it was close to 40%. Weak governance makes the poor vulnerable to the risk of being trafficked. The absence of effective legislation and policies as well as poor IAW enforcement and corruption contribute to this. Trafficking happens both within and across national borders. However, national governments and other stakeholders are yet to give this issue the priority it deserves, mainly because of the shortage of convincing data, the study said. Information is available with regard to brothel-based sex work, but this reveals nothing about those who practice sex work in other settings. The study said, adding researchers need to look beyond sex work, since those who are trafficked for other purposes also find themselves in situations that increase their vulnerability to HIV. The clandestine nature of the phenomenon, criminal linkages and the cross-border spread mask the scale of the problem, titled Human Trafficking and HIV, Exploring Vulnerabilities and Responses in South Asia. The analysis in this report is based on rapid assessment studies conducted in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal and Pakistan between 2004 and 2005. These studies explored the links between human trafficking, migration, and HIV/AIDS in these countries and reviewed available data. The national laws, policies, strategies and responses. One of the fundamental weaknesses in explaining and exploring the linkages between trafficking and HIV is lack of adequate data, said Ms. Caitlin Wiesen, Ratio-IL HIV/AIDS team leader and program coordinator for Asia Pacific, LNDP Regional HIV and Development Program. With Harvard School of Public Health, the regional program is initiating a 3-country research study on the linkages between human trafficking and HIV in Asia, she said. 3.7 Poverty and powerlessness. Poverty is also defined in terms of lack of power. Power in these terms is to be the degree of control one has over material, human, intellectual and financial resource. The rich enjoy a power or a freedom to make decisions. Very often, the rich tend to unjustly exploit the poor because they have power to do so. Poverty is powerlessness. In preparation for the World Development Report 2000-2001, Attacking Poverty, PE, World Bank conducted a research study that brought together the experiences of over 60,000 poor women and men from 60 countries around the world. The defining experience of poor people, the report stated, involve highly limited choices and an inability to make themselves heard or to influence or control what happens to them. Powerlessness results from multiple disadvantages, some we have seen above, which in combination make it extremely difficult for poor people to escape poverty. The report affirmed that insecurity of life had increased and they have not been able to take advantage of new opportunities because of corruption and a lack of connections, assets, finance, information and skills. We will basically need to confront such structures in our social, economic and political systems. NGOs who attempt to tackle the roots of poverty are frequently attacked by the powerful. These power brokers may be politicians who want their power because they want control over the poor. Or they may be the wealthy landlords who require the poor to provide cheap labor. Unjust power relationships are systematically imposed in both rich and poor countries on the basis of gender, age, caste, class or even education. Unjust power relationships also lead to deprivation of basic human rights for the poor. Human rights, according to the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are the basic rights and freedoms to which all humans are entitled. These include civil and political rights, such as the right to life and liberty, freedom of thought and expression, and equality before the law, and social, cultural and economic rights, such as the right to participate in culture, the right to work, and the right to education. We can see how poverty can easily lead to the deprivation of such basic rights. The poor become more and more powerless. NGO communities must not merely be engaged in feeding the poor or providing monetary packages for temporary relief. There are some revolutionary attempts like Bangladesh's Nobel Prize winner and his microfinance programs which have lifted women out of powerlessness to become decision makers in their communities. We can begin restoring power by engaging in FBLing the right of poor to education, to good health, the right to a clean environment, etc. 3.8 Dependency to sustainability. You have read above about the gradual shift that NGOs have been making from service, welfare and relief activities on to development. The NGO community has in their understanding of various issues in development. A more recent intruder into jargon has been sustainability. We attempt to explore the term. The concept came into general use following publication of the report of the United Nations Brundtland Commission 1987. This was through the World Commission on Environment and Development or WCED. Sustainable development soon became a buzzword. World leaders were getting concerned that energy and resources were being overutilized and would not last very long. The strain on the earth was intensifying. Nations were called to adopt sustainable development measures. According to the WCED, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In other words, humans must not concern the earth's resources as if there is an endless supply. We must think of future generations. The essence of this form of development is a healthy relationship between human activities and the natural resources, a relationship which considers that future generations must also enjoy a quality of life at least as good as our own. The goal of environmental sustainability is to arrest environmental degradation and to halt and reverse the processes leading to disaster. Sustainable development is concerned with maintaining a delicate balance between the human need to maintain lifestyles and well-being on one hand, but also preserving natural resources and ecosystems in order that future generations depend. The term refers to achieving economic and social development in ways that do not exhaust a country's natural resources. Sustainable development does not focus solely on environmental issues and encompass three general policy areas: economic, environmental and social. In support of this, several United Nations texts, most recently the 2005 World Summit Outcome Document, refer to the interdependent and mutually reinforcing pillars of sustainable development as economic development, social development, and environmental protection. The Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity, UNESCO 201, added another area: cultural diversity. Here development is understood not simply in terms of economic growth, but also as a means to achieve a more satisfactory intellectual, emotional, moral and spiritual existence. Cultural diversity is the fourth policy area of sustainable development. Therefore, sustainable development is a holistic socio-economic ecological process bringing about the fulfillment of human needs while maintaining the quality of the natural environment indefinitely for future generations. Environment and the poor. In India, the majority of the poor lives in rural areas and depends directly on natural resources and ecological services for their livelihoods. Over 60% of the country's workforce depends on agriculture, fisheries and forests for their livelihood. The loss of this resource naturally leads to poverty. UNDP in a document entitled The Poverty and Environment Nexus records that there are about 100 million people in the country who live in and around forests and another 275 million for whom forests constitute an important source of livelihood. Gathering of fuel, wood, fodder and non-timber forest products from forests is an important subsistence and economic activity, particularly for women. Similarly, on the Indian coast, the densest coastal region in the world, a large population depends primarily on fishing for livelihood as well as nutrition. Over the last 2 decades, the availability of natural resources to rural communities and especially to the poor has been affected severely, and there could be several contributing factors. One of these is the natural impacts we have seen in recent decades through changing ecological patterns. Apart from the changing patterns, there are also unexpected calamities like floods and drought. The tsunami that hit Asia recently has devastated the lives of millions of poor. The already deprived are unable to cope with such shocks as they exist on meager resource basis. The objective of this conference was to provide national and international perspectives on the challenges facing India's attainment of the Millennium Development Goals. The conference featured the presentation of a recent World Bank report entitled Attaining the Millennium Development Goals in India and showcased the vision of the country's key policy makers for attaining these goals. The conference also provided a glimpse of the 10th Plan Roadmap to achieving the MDGs, an overview of the United Nations support to these goals, and views of key policymakers in this area. Concrete examples of policy interventions for achieving the MDGs in India were discussed through case studies. Goal 1, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Goal 2, achieve universal primary education. Goal 3, promote gender equality and empower women. Goal 4, reduce child mortality. B. Goal 5, improve maternal health. Goal 6, combat HIV/AIDS, malaria and otic diseases. Goal 7, ensure environmental sustainability. Goal 8, develop a global partnership for development. Activity 4, are NGOs able to address the MDGs through their programs? What kind of assistance is required from governments and international agencies? 3.10 Summary. His unit takes into consideration the issues that need to be addressed by NGOs to make them proactive and become change agents for the society at large. It is important to understand the underlying issues such as poverty, dependency and sustainability. This unit explores the relationship between poverty and development through various case studies in Tura, giving a practical understanding of the whole concept. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.